on TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV.
Good evening and welcome to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. You're with Talk, we're on TV, we're on radio, we're online, and of course, we're on your smart speaker as well. Now, the husband of former Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, the former chief executive of the SNP, has been charged in connection with the embezzlement of party funds, having been taken into custody and questioned by police this very morning. You may remember he was arrested last April before being released that time without being charged and had resigned as the party's chief executive the month before. The ongoing probe into the SNP's finances is investigating the fate of £600,000 worth of donations made to the party. We'll be keeping an eye on this over the coming days. But joining me tonight, first of all, journalist and broadcaster Sam Dowler, Conservative commentator Samantha Smith, and barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn. I think that's the first time we've got it right, you know. It was actually really good.
I loved it.
Like we planned it.
Very smart.
Yes. Samantha, welcome to the Independent Republic for the first time.
Thank you
Sam, welcome back.
Thank you.
You I saw last night.
What a party that was.
So I apologise for not being here last night, but I was at James Wells' MBE party, which was brilliant.
Glorious.
Looked like a hoot, I have to say.
Took me until about now to recover from it. So. Anyway, here we go. Let's talk about this ridiculous situation, right? Because it's only a week on from the latest round of Tory Sleaze with old William Ragg and Willie Gate. He was caught in a sexting honey trap. The backbenchers of the government are now going full steam ahead. Have a look at this. Mark Menzies, MP for Fylde, has had the whip suspended over claims that he misused campaign funds that ended up in his personal bank account. He claimed to an elderly campaign aide that he was locked up by bad people. He also claimed he had £14,000 of campaign donation money transferred to his account for medical expenses, all after reportedly having sex with an escort and being quizzed by police on the bizarre suspicion of him attempting to, wait for it, get a dog drunk. Now, that may sound like a long list, but there's another list of former Tories who have lost the whip over some scandal or other. Here goes. Now, check this out. You might have forgotten some. Imran Ahmed for sexually abusing a teenager, Peter Bone for exposing his genitals, Chris Pincher for drunken groping, Matt Hancock, remember him, signing up for I'm a Celebrity, Charlie Elphick, jail for sexual assault, Andrew Bridgen for comparing the COVID vaccine rollout to the Holocaust, Neil Parish, accused of watching porn in the Commons, Julian Knight, allegations of a serious sexual assault, Bob Stewart, racially aggravated public order offence, Rob Roberts, sexual harassment, David Warburton, 3 allegations of sexual harassment, Lee Anderson, alleged Islamophobia, but he's now defected to Reform, and Crispin Blunt, arrested on suspicion of rape and possession of controlled substances. I mean, it's not really like a political party at all. It's like some kind of mad... Yeah, I mean, it's some kind of mad organisation.
It's scandal bingo, isn't it?
I woke up this morning and Grindr was trending on Twitter for...
I didn't know what you were going to say there.
Yes,
Well, for those who don't know, it's a salubrious gay dating app.
Had they had the whip removed from Grindr?
There was...
No, so you can still get it.
Grindr would close down if they tried to remove the whips. No. So, and it's more embarrassment for the Tories, more embarrassment for gay Tories, for LGBT people anyway. And it's like... To call up an elderly person who helps you with your local
at 3 o'clock in the morning
at 3:15, it's saying you've been trapped, and he's obviously gone round for some sort of, I mean, it's allegedly gone round.
He denies all of it, right?
Of course he does.
There's an awful lot out there.
And then he's getting blackmailed, and here we are again. It's just mortifying.
And it's the classic cyber scam, isn't it? You're working on that sort of basis. Sorry, I'm locked. I haven't got my phone, Mum. It's somebody else's. I borrowed a phone. Please send this money.
This is just off the back of the explosive BBC Panorama investigation, which exposed that many young staffers and parliamentary aides and those working within the saucy halls of Westminster feel unsafe or unable to complete their work because those in positions of power are so completely devoid of moral compass and so protected by the old guard. You know, you see this with Crispin Blunt, you see this with, on the other end of the spectrum, Keith Vaz and his many scandals. It seems as though those in positions of power, the only point at which they will take action, the whips or the party or whoever it is, the powers that be, is when their reputation is brought into question and when it becomes public.
Yeah.
If it's left up to those within the old guard to take a stand, they never will.
No.
Because it's easier just to ignore it because, you know, this is a very important man or a very important person making very important decisions, and who cares if they go off and screw an intern.
Also, do you think it's different down there? Because in society now, if somebody makes an allegation, the tendency is for people to believe it before they do anything else. But I wonder if in Westminster, the tendency is to not believe it and to go, actually, because they have had a few of those as well, where people have been accused of things which it turned out they didn't do. But I wonder if they've got sort of a different operational kind of method of being, just because they seem to not believe the story.
I think you're so right, Mike. And the other question is why it took so long for them to deal with it.
Right.
Because apparently they've known about it for a long time.
Right.
In the same way as they talked about other scandals, is you've got to get out. You've got to have a procedure in place.
Yeah.
As soon as you get this, you investigate and make sure that appropriate action is taken.
Yeah.
Surely it's a red flag once you've got the dog drunk, right? So,
well, do you know what his defence for that, apparently, is that the dog actually got himself drunk? He's going, you're going, sorry?
The
So
dog
the dog
wanted
just
it.
kind of got
The
hold
dog
of the booze
wanted it,
by
yeah.
himself.
I've worked in media for a couple of decades, and,
Yes.
and there were times, and I have to say this, it is a gay thing, as you say, young gay men. Like if an older man, whether they're gay or not, you know, is handsy or whatever, you just go, all right, mate, or like you push it away because it's less. It's almost like it's okay to grab my bum, but it's not okay to grab a woman's bum anymore. But it's, for me, it's like, they're all blokes.
It is
so
so,
tough,
it
but
is
it
so
isn't.
important to call it out.
Of course.
But
That's the other
thing.
thing that's weird, because a lot of people in Westminster must know that your experience is exactly what happens to a lot of young people. And I've heard that story from many people who have gone into it and thought it was going to be the dream job and suddenly found themselves either, you know, victimised in some bad, horrible way.
In the real world, a 50-something-year-old man preying on a 21-year-old intern, or, you know, going on dating sites and giving out their colleagues' work information, would be, you know, it would be a fireable offence. It just wouldn't happen.
Absolutely appalling, isn't it? And what's going to happen is people should learn the lessons. And I predicted earlier on, with the lead up to the election, there's going to be more and more of these scandals going to come to light across all parties. And the reality is,
But it's a very high proportion of any workplace. I mean, you know,
Yes.
people worked in lots of different places, and there's always one or two strange people. But I mean, there's an awful lot of them in Westminster.
Yeah.
We're not
Tory
going to shock
whips
you,
list?
but when we want you to vote for something, we're going to come to you
You're so
and
right,
say,
Mike. And we hear about this, about the whips.
Yeah.
They will use this information and appropriate to keep people in line.
Isn't that just corruption?
Well, I think what we need to do, and it's a really serious issue, what we need to do is to call it out in the right sort of way that you do, because it should stop. It is appalling, and whilst we can joke about the other bits and pieces, you're absolutely right. It's horrendous, and we're going to get more and more of it. I say more and more of it. It's going to work on that sort of basis, especially in the lead up to the election.
I mean, it's interesting to see whether it's these kinds of people that are naturally attracted to politics, or whether it's something about Westminster culture and politics that corrupts otherwise ordinary or upstanding people to commit these very heinous, horrible crimes.
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Are people who are likely to do that attracted to this kind of job? Yes. You're watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham. Thank you, everyone. We'll have you back shortly. A failed asylum seeker whose deportation was blocked by a do-gooder cabin crew has pleaded guilty to rape. More coming up on that after the break. Back. You're watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk TV. Now, a 40-year-old failed asylum seeker, Anisette Mayel, who once protested against outside a detention centre holding a sign that read, "Migrants are not criminals," could now face life in jail for raping a 15-year-old. Mayel was able to stay in Britain after a failed asylum bid, as his deportation was blocked by a do-gooder cabin crew who prevented his repatriation flight from taking off. Brilliant. I'm now joined by international border control expert Henry Bolton, and still with me is barrister and broadcaster Andrew Eborn. Welcome back, Andrew and Henry. Nice to see you. You probably remember this case, as do I, and there was a big hoo-ha about it, because I think even the passengers on the plane was telling the cabin crew and everybody else, "Oh, leave him alone, take him off the plane." You know, this whole, it wasn't just a cabin crew of do-gooders, it was an entire plane load.
It was.
Meanwhile, this guy, who it turns out is actually a criminal, has now been done for being a criminal.
Yeah, funny old thing. Yeah, it was an Air France plane, so we should get that straight. Because for me, I've been saying for a while that, you know, with regards to the Rwanda plan, which is a red herring, it's not going to deter anything, but it's the government's plan, and they want to go ahead with it, and they're having all sorts of problems with it, as we all know. But One of the problems that they've got is that they have so far not identified any airline that is prepared to fly people to Rwanda.
Right.
And therefore the Ministry of Defence is on standby. This is the same Ministry of Defence that's on standby to deal with things in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, in the Middle East, and wherever else. Its priority is not to be flying asylum seekers around the world. But I have been saying for a long time that the government needs to build up the immigration service to such an extent that it's got its own people to escort, because at the moment it's outsourced. Yeah. In fact, I think they've just recently issued a contract to a company to provide escorts. Yes, these people are civilians. They have no powers of arrest. They have whatever quality of training that they have and so on. And if you are going to put asylum seekers who may well decide to kick off, particularly if there's previous for a flight being cancelled or them being taken off the flight if they do kick off on the flight. If you're going to put such people on a civilian aircraft with cabin crew who have no training in dealing with such a situation, in that sort of context, with passengers who might be frightened and worried about it because they're civilians as well, why catch them up in this? The government needs to put the correct resources behind the plan that it wants to implement. Yes. It has failed singularly to do that.
So my
and that's my problem.
My understanding, well, there are two issues on this. My understanding is they do have a backup plan if some of the airlines don't take it. But it's the more important issue...
They say they have.
Well, we're going to
what is it, though?
Well, exactly. We need to... They say they've got other planes which they make something happen. But the most important thing is, which is the main sort of thrust of this story, is this guy is a criminal.
Yeah.
So the question is, and he's admitted to raping this 15-year-old girl. The question is, when did that occur?
Yes. Did it not happen after he was taken off the plane?
I think that's
my
the reality.
understanding is that he hadn't committed the rape before he was being deported for other reasons.
Yes,
it did. But this is also nigh on 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And we're still, this case is still. I mean, okay, but he was supposed to have been deported. Then he wasn't deported because of this incident. Right. And that whole scenario of this chap being allowed to remain in the UK, despite all of that, has continued until the point that he commits a rape.
We know from a story that came out, I think, a couple of weeks ago from the Home Office itself, that hardly anybody gets deported, even if they actually are ordered to be deported. Mostly they remain in the country. Mostly they disappear. Nobody really knows where they are. We've already lost, I think, this year 6,000 asylum seekers. Nobody knows where they've gone. But equally, the ones who are apparently supposed to be deported, apart from the ones that went to Albania, they just don't leave.
No. You're absolutely right, Mike. And what we need is that clarity, and we need people to actually enforce the rules. If people are criminals, and it's fine this guy holding up a sign saying migrants are not criminals, well, he is a criminal. Right. Well, and he's admitted now. We need to work on the basis.
This is the whole thing about people's argument with regards to the ECHR, pulling out of the ECHR, because it removes one of the layers that prevents these deportations taking place. But time and time again, I go back to the point that Parliament is sovereign. Parliament can make these laws. The government can make these decisions to make these things happen. It is a matter of courage and political courage and the determination, the will to do it.
So what should the law be then? What should the rule be?
Well, the rule...
Yes, in terms of, you say you can get certainty...
Excuse me, I'm asking the question.
I'm sorry.
There's some reversal of roles going on. But then it's a good question, so I'll carry on. You carry on.
I mean, you've got umpteen rules, but I mean, if a foreign national commits a crime that is imprisonable for 6 months or more, at the moment I think it's 12 months, then I would want to see them deported. But you have to have the operational resources in place.
You have to do it.
But to do that, you have to have the operational resources in place. You have to have the political will to drive through the bureaucracy, the naysayers, the activists. And if the law does not allow you to do it, which actually I believe that it does, then you've got to change the law. If you are a government, a party that has the majority in Parliament, you can drive that through.
Absolutely. And the law can say anything. The same way you can declare a country safe, even if it's not, just by changing the law.
The Rwanda bill at the moment, we heard the other day that now we've got Costa Rica, Botswana, Ivory Coast and Armenia being talked, with the negotiations going on regarding sending asylum seekers there as well as Rwanda. Fine, we're passing a Rwanda safety bill. And as I said at the time, that's a one-off piece of legislation. It is utterly flawed because it is not part of a comprehensive
Mm.
plan.
Yes.
You work out your comprehensive plan. Does it include Armenia? Does it include all these other countries? You draft the law and put it in front of Parliament accordingly.
Yes.
Absolutely.
At the moment,
They
it's
don't
just,
seem to be very good at this, which is basically their
Mike,
job.
they're
Yeah.
appalling.
Right.
They
and
are
there's
utterly
hundreds
appalling.
and hundreds of people at their disposal in the Home Office who could frame this
Yes.
particular law if they wanted to.
And it's
frame
not-
it.
it's not that
You know,
difficult.
But
it's
could
not that
they?
difficult.
But I asked the question, could they? Because I'm honestly not sure, A, that they want to,
Yes.
B, that they do have the knowledge and the experience to do so.
Right.
And the other
But
point as
also,
well,
if they
yeah.
don't have the planes, should
Yeah.
we not have the ability? But I'll remind you of something else that happened. When
Yes.
there was a suggestion we should send them to Ascension Island,
Yes.
and the RAF actually said we're not going to do that.
Right.
Well,
They
the
said
RAF,
the
like I
RAF
said,
refused to do it.
As I say, the
Excuse
RAF
me.
has got other commitments.
Well, yeah, they
You
may
know.
have commitments, but it was almost like they didn't want to do it. It wasn't
Yeah.
so much that we've got too many commitments. It was
But if they-
as a sort of a matter of policy.
We've got
they
so
wouldn't
many of
do
these
it.
people, it's worth buying the aircraft
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
getting the staff to crew them.
Mike's
But-
absolutely right, though. You have to have a policy which is going to be enforced. It's not,
Yeah,
otherwise, it's just
exactly.
the letter of the law needs to be enforced. And the other point, and Mike made the point brilliantly last week, is that we discovered that during the coronation, these various countries
Yeah.
were tapped up over the Volvos, weren't they, to say, well,
Amazing.
will you take a few for
Well,
us?
would you mind? Yeah, absolutely right. And meanwhile, the Rwanda bill's been delayed again.
Yes.
We were told it might actually
Ping pong.
become a bill by Friday, and
Mm.
that's not now going to happen because the Lords have put the amendments back
Yeah.
in, which the Commons took out.
And they say they say the first people will be by
Well,
spring, but they don't say
think
which
there
year.
are two things I'd like to say. But one is that this failure,
Yes.
as this case actually demonstrates or illustrates, is putting the British public at risk.
Yes.
Which is a massive government failure of the first order. The second thing is that the government, there was a referendum, the Brexit referendum,
Yeah.
in which...
I've heard of that.
So have I. In which most people voted, or a lot of people voted, because they wanted immigration
Yeah.
under control. And it has exploded since. Not because of Brexit, but because of the poor governance of this by the British government and Parliament. And then in 2019, there was a very clear majority for the Conservative Party on the back of a promise to reduce immigration.
Yeah.
The British public has spoken democratically as to what their will is. Okay. Now, democracy is a protection if you listen to it. If politicians ignore the democratic will as expressed in the ballot, then democracy does not work as an insurance policy any longer. And then we see this sort of thing happening. The British public put at risk. You see sort of localised problems that you can't control anymore because you've sort of kind of lost track of where you are democratically. So there are a whole raft of problems here. There is no national strategy. And it goes back to the point, and I think earlier you discussed Mike Menzies and...
Well, I was going to
and
say
we've
they're all too busy getting held hostage.
well, they're getting held
and
hostage.
and looking for
busy-
partners on
I mean,
Grindr.
these people, surely, we, the British public, should be demanding that we've got people who have experienced enough,
Yes.
have the ability, have the strategic grasp and everything to be effective legislators for the nation and to be leaders.
Yes.
Because at the moment, we don't have any of
Well,
that.
have a look at
from
this story.
and I'm not being party political there.
Listen, no, we're talking about the Home Office, effectively. Here we've got a story today. A Home Office caseworker has been arrested on suspicion of trying to sell a UK residency to an asylum seeker living in Northern Ireland. Apparently, this official allegedly contacted a vulnerable man and asked for £2,000 in return for approving his refugee application.
It's a scandal.
I mean, again, whenever you see these kinds of stories, you think, well, there can't be just one, can there?
no.
There'll be a load of these kinds of
And
stories.
you're absolutely right, Mike. So what we need to do is, and again, they need to, as soon as you hear about these things, they say, look, this is the problem, this is how we sorted it, so we make sure it doesn't happen again. And these are the extra precautions.
But they don't do any of that.
No, they don't. And it's just so clear. That's why we need leaders on that basis.
I'm sorry, I've got to the cynical stage now, and I try to avoid being cynical, but in politics you can't. I wonder who this person is.
Yeah.
Did they work for an agency that was in some way connected with
It says that they've been suspended.
Yeah.
People. So, I mean,
Well,
they're
if we
saying
know that they've done it, they should be out in their ear.
Well, exactly right. But, I mean, once again, there'll be an investigation
Yes.
as to how it all happened.
And they'll
But
get
there
those
should be-
fines.
to be fair, there should be an investigation, and I think the usual employment law things is...
Yeah, that's fair enough.
It's got to be fair. So, abhorrent if it happened. If it has happened, they've got to respond very, very quickly and say, this is what we're going to do about it, and also to root it out. As Mike brilliantly points out, it's not going to be the only case.
Yeah.
No, it's
And
not.
behind
And
it-
this is something that has been happening, particularly, yes, I'm going to name them, in Romania and Bulgaria for the last 20 years.
Right.
There has been a problem with officials in those countries selling passports and falsifying identification and travel documents that are biometric.
Yes.
But of course, if you're going to have people who lack the integrity to police the system properly and are prepared to try and make a quick buck out of it, then you've got a real problem, because biometric passports, if the breeder documents are compromised, then the biometric passport, which is taken far more as identification than it ever previous passports, then you've got a border problem.
Absolutely.
But that's the thing. The whole
we go back to the
system
security of the country.
is not fit for purpose. This
Correct.
particular member of staff has apparently been arrested as well. Who knows what they're going to charge him with? But at the end of the day, you know, we know that none of the Home Office system works in any way, shape or form. From the
I think
people land on the beach at Dover or wherever they land,
Mike,
they are basically here for life.
I've said on many occasions, we need a properly comprehensive and integrated cross-government strategy here, run not by the Home Office, not by the Foreign Office, not by the Cabinet Office, by, if you like, a border czar who has the authority from Cabinet to pull together and mutually support all of the efforts of all of the different agencies involved in this. There's about 18 by my calculation. There should be a set of national objectives about this, and it needs to be driven through. When you have this government department doing that and another one doing this, Foreign Office, the Home Office, the whoever, then they're all working to their own secretaries of state, their own hierarchies, and you end up with
a fudge.
It is a fudge.
It's a fudge, isn't it? It just doesn't work.
It
doesn't. We're out of time, so thank you very much to both.
Got me wound up.
You're watching. We'll be talking about it for many years. I'm sure it's to come. Welcome back to the Independent Republic of Mike Graham, right here on Talk TV. Plank of the Week returns tomorrow night from 7 p.m, only here, of course, on Talk TV. Here's a little snippet of what you can expect. Let's go to Humza Useless and see what he's got to say for himself.
I love this clip.
You know,
it just keeps giving, doesn't
Never
it?
gets old. Never gets old.
Let's have
Bravo,
another look.
Sam,
For
bravo.
those who didn't catch it the last
Can we do it
55
again?
times. Yeah, let's
Please.
do it.
Can we do it in slow-mo?
Well, I'd like to, actually, yeah. It's brilliant. This is when he decided to
at that.
show off on his scooter.
Oh,
He actually asked for a camera.
How can he mic that up?
Oh, God.
He's also, the funniest thing about it is that apparently he'd asked for a photographer to be in the corridor to show off about how brilliant he
It was
was.
actually pre-planned.
Yes,
That's what's
so the
terrifying
photographer was
about
actually
it,
asked to be there.
Yeah.
So that he could capture it. There we are. Terribly unfair, of course. Every time Humza Useless gets a nomination, which is quite frequently, we just play it every single time. But we'll come back to Scotland because we've got things to talk about net zero up there. But come on, it's another day and another chance for the BBC to broadcast its own stupidity. The corporation is about to face one of its most high-profile tribunals since it lost a gender pay dispute with Newswatch presenter Samira Ahmed in 2020. But because that alone isn't embarrassing enough for the BBC, they're going to court with someone. They're not going to court with someone credible. That would be ridiculous. No, they're going to war with Martine Croxall, the presenter who was taken off air for acting like she'd just won the lottery minutes after the news broke that Boris Johnson had pulled out of the race to become Prime Minister.
Well, this is all very exciting, isn't it? Hello and welcome to our look ahead to what the papers will be bringing us tomorrow. Am I allowed to be this gleeful? Well, I am.
Well, you're not, actually, no. The fleets of viewers who complain to Ofcom clearly think BBC impartiality is a joke. And by the sounds of it, so does Martine. Well, rather than keeping her head down, she's now amongst 5 female presenters suing for age discrimination, sex discrimination and unequal pay. She and other colleagues were told to reapply for a small pool of chief presenter roles after it was announced that the corporation's home and world news channels would be merged in April of last year. They claim they were unfairly selected for redundancy and declined voluntary redundancies and for a time were left without job titles. But as the presenters were all due to return, they all continue to receive their full pay package. Well, her work woes don't seem to have stopped her enjoying her time off. She seems to have had a pretty gleeful year out, smiling her way around the world, skiing in Bulgaria, feeding elephants in Thailand and taking hot air balloon rides, presumably fuelled by her own unlimited supply of hot air. Well, good luck getting anyone to take you seriously, Martine, because you're going to need it. Now, let's bring the panel back in. Sam is back. Samantha is back as well. And you don't have a name that begins with SAM, unfortunately.
I don't. Isn't that awful?
But you can, if you wish, do your little thing. Andrew Eborn is here. Are we going to get it? There you go. pathetic, isn't it? Just ridiculous.
Oh, that was like Sharon Smith's show on the West End.
Well, I
was,
could be the other Sam Smith, because you've
yeah.
got Samantha Smith, haven't we? We've got to get confused people.
You're a
Exactly right.
minority in here. For
I
the
am
first
a
time,
minority.
a white
Actually,
male is
actually-
minority.
It's true, a white heterosexual male, whatever next on television.
Yeah, I did.
That's
I
what you say.
And I did bleach my hair in the pandemic and put on a little poundage and my partner did say you're looking a bit Sam Smith.
Oh, is that, I dyed my hair grey, especially to make things sort of diverse enough.
And it makes you look so intelligent.
Thank you. It's all terribly deceptive.
You guys just carry on chatting amongst yourselves. Something's happening on this show. I don't know. He starts asking Henry Bolton questions about migrants. I'm going, what's going on? Anyway, listen, Martine Croxall, you said
Yes.
you liked her. I think
do.
she made a complete fool of herself. But the great thing about the BBC is that these people, and she's been there, believe it or not, 30 plus years.
Yes.
She got her first job at the BBC
Yep.
as a work experience person at BBC Radio Leicester. And the problem that I have with people in the BBC is that's the only job they ever have. They go to the BBC sort of as a man and boy, or whatever it is, or girl, or a non-binary individual, and then they just stay there for life, for years and years
But
and
it's,
years.
I have to say, I worked for the BBC like as a temp, but like I remember being.
I've done shows at the BBC.
I remember wishing that I was there longer because it's auntie. Do you know what I mean? It's an all-encompassing big kind of corporate hub.
Yeah, but it shouldn't be though.
So,
it
well,
should be a
it-
commercial
it-
organisation like everybody else.
It
has
should
to
have been. I do feel bad for Martine because I think she is a good newsreader.
Actually, a great news. What I love about her, when she did, I checked.
Feel
the
free to
video
interrupt
before.
them, Samantha, because they like to just, these mansplaining
I'll let him
types,
have his
you know what I mean?
moment.
Feel free to...
Finish up, Andrew. Let Sam speak.
No, but I feel bad. I remember that I was watching it just before we came in, and it was that gleeful moment. And she was giggling all about Boris Johnson, who just pulled out the leadership race when they were going to be doing the Sunday papers, I think it was.
Yeah.
And it worked on that sort of basis. But also, I mean, a good friend of mine, Mariam, you remember the countdown thing that she did fairly recently?
Oh, yes.
And these things go viral.
Right.
But the difficulty is this, so the last difficulty is this, is they used to have two separate things doing news, didn't they? They effectively merged it into one. And they basically said, well, people have to reapply for the job.
Yeah.
The allegation
perfectly
here-
normal
The
practice
issue
of
is
media.
with Martine's allegations is that, yes, as you said, she was a fantastic newsreader, but the moment she stopped being a newsreader was the moment that she inserted herself into personal, partisan, political affairs. And, her display on that nightly news programme was, I think, the beginning of the end for her.
Right.
Not because she was aging, not because she had been there so long, not because they were discriminating against her, but because her primary function as a newsreader had been undermined by no one but herself.
Right.
And there have been cases where, female presenters, especially in the business, have been taken off air due to age. In Canada, there was a famous example recently of Lisa Laflamme, the CTV anchor who successfully, I believe, sued Bell Media for age discrimination. But Martine here, I don't think there's anyone that is really believing that she was taken off because 55 is too old.
Yeah.
I would have said she could easily look like she's in her early 40s.
Yeah.
The issue is that she undermined her own credibility and could not be
Yes.
trusted to read the news when she displayed such a flagrant disregard for the impartiality rules that we and other, Talk TV, GB News, etc., are expected to abide by.
Yeah,
Why is it
exactly
different
right.
for them?
Yeah, no,
Ofcom are always all over anyone who says something which they think they shouldn't have said in the role that they've particularly got, particularly if it's at GB News or if it's here. But at the BBC, you very rarely hear of anybody actually complaining about that.
Well, because here and GB News, people presenters freely talk about their own thoughts and their.
Yeah, but she wasn't a presenter, she's a newsreader.
So what you're saying is that Talk TV and GB News is just presenters, whereas they have
Well, it's
to
a
abide.
different job.
So they have exactly, it's a different job. Exactly. That's
But I
the whole
don't
point.
remember, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember Ofcom issuing any statement about what she did.
No.
She was taken off air by the BBC.
Exactly.
Yes.
Nevertheless, though, if that had been somewhere
I mean,
like this,
If you look at Channel 4, do you remember Krishna Murthy, I believe it was, that called a senior Tory MP a see you next
Right.
Tuesday on air.
Right.
And yet he was allowed to return to
And
his
look
job
at-
after a
Didn't he mean
our
didn't he
good
mean
friend-
say Hunt?
Oh, yes, definitely.
was an
Yeah, I'm
accident.
well,
sure,
the
I'm
BBC
sure.
all do that.
Sure.
They- I
Yes.
mean,
But
there's
they don't
a
use their
tape
job.
of them all doing it. Now, I've said Jeremy Hunt many times.
Yes.
I've never called him the wrong word.
No.
But they do it, I'm sure, absolutely deliberately.
But-
and they wouldn't do it to a Labour Party.
Sure.
person.
And
do
they
it to
wouldn't
Tory.
face the sort of repercussions that
And
if
they all-
you
they all giggle about
had
it.
done that, you
Right.
would be off on
Well,
the
look at
street
Nick
side.
Robinson. Nick Robinson this week on the Today programme,
Yes.
interviewing David Cameron, refers to Israel murdering innocent
absolutely.
civilians
He
in
called it
Palestine.
out rightly.
And you go, sorry? And he issued this very mealy-mouthed apology in which he said he should have been clearer in the words that he used. It was clearly anti-Semitic, what he said. They're not murdering civilians.
No, and it's absolutely right to call it out. I think it's important to point out that this case is not about the gleeful comment.
No, it's not.
No.
But it's all about
everything's
age
related.
discrimination.
But everything's related.
And I think that the issue that, the case that's being brought is a very legitimate one, and there are real issues with sexism in the mainstream media and the way that women seem to have a shorter shelf life as broadcasters or presenters than their male counterparts. But Martine is not the person to be spearheading this, considering that she has her own scandals surrounding her time as a newsreader that have, I would say, muddied the waters of her ability to claim age discrimination.
I was going to say, but she is correct in the fact that men end up being on television until they decide to go in their 70s or whatever. Whereas
Which is
women,
David Attenborough,
whereas women, for example, like you only need to look at Strictly with Brucey knocking 80 and obviously Tess like in her 30s or 40s, whatever. So there is sexism rife. So I do understand, but obviously with the joking and laughing about Boris, that's a different thing. Right?
But also the thing about this issue is that they do in all sorts of media businesses slim down, expand. They have to cut their cloth accordingly. She's been there, as I say, more than 30 years. She was probably offered a pretty good redundancy deal, better than anybody would get offered from a commercial company. She turned it down, and now she's complaining that she got sidelined. Yet she's been on full pay, as you say, tramping around the world, having a very nice time. I don't really care, but it's our money at the end of the day. And there isn't, I don't think, any other job that you can have in any other media organisation like that. Because when you're in with the BBC, you're in with the furniture. They just don't, don't get rid of people.
And all the information is going to come out. I think the trial starts on the 1st of May.
Yes.
So all of this will come out on that sort of basis. But it's also the question is, they were saying they were asked to apply for a job.
Yeah.
And what the allegation, which again will come out, is, whether it's true or not, the allegation was they'd already decided which presenters they were going to have. So getting people to do the dance.
But it happens all the time.
Of course it does.
I mean, I've done many redundancy exercises in my career at the newspaper businesses, and you have a certain number. Management says you've got to lose this number of people. If enough of them don't volunteer, you're going to have to figure out who you're going to get rid of.
And I always say it's really important.
And you don't want to be left with all the dregs.
No, exactly. But I always think it's important that people should be treated with respect. So whenever they're doing...
I disagree with that. It's been the downfall of this nation. Treating people with respect is a very bad idea.
I have to say
it's gone too far.
Within our nation, you only need to look over to American politics right now with the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene, etc. They have lost civility, and which is something that we do have still. Like never, even
I worry actually.
But even
I think we've gone the same
no,
way.
I would agree.
Public space.
I don't think maybe in the public space in places like Twitter. I'm literally writing an article about this at the moment. But like if you look at PMQs, for example, there's still a kind of jovialness about it. There isn't this kind.
It's quite civilised.
We love a pantomime.
It's still civilised, is what I'm
But
saying.
you also need to fact check. And so when Keir Starmer was sort of saying, the billionaire Rishi Sunak,
Yes, of course.
and somebody corrects, well, he's not quite a billionaire unless you add a lot of
like Samantha says, it's panto. It's panto.
Oh, no, it isn't. Where's your career?
Also, you did see this week, didn't you, Wes Streeting and his fellow front bench Labour Party shadow cabinet members laughing at the possibility that people like Nigel Farage were being sort of locked up over in Brussels for having what was supposedly a conference about, right-wing views. So I think it has shifted a little bit. But let's talk about Scotland, because there's a lot going on up there at the moment. Scotland ditches net zero. This is a great story. It's the first thing that I think Humza Useless has actually got right, because he's the Scottish government, believe it or not, was the first government in the world to set out net zero targets, right? And of course, they famously had COP26, where Alok Sharma burst into tears.
Great whiskey, by the way, when you had that guy
was
on.
good whiskey, yeah.
I love that.
I gave it to my son.
How long did that last?
So I think he still hasn't. I don't think he's finished it yet. It's 800 quid's worth of whiskey.
It was.
Wow.
Nice. Anyway, they've apparently decided they're so useless at hitting the targets, even though they've reduced. Britain has actually reduced its targets by 50%. In about 20 years. They're saying now we can't hit the target, so we're just going to forget about it. We're just not going to do net zero.
But they're saying they're forgetting about the immediate target. They still reckon they're going to hit it by 2040 or whatever it is.
2040
yeah, but they won't, will they?
I mean, we saw something similar with the Labour Party and Keir Starmer essentially truncheoning his multi-billion pound net zero goal. Exactly. What we're seeing is the great net zero lie unraveling, which is that many governments and politicians have used the myth of net zero to try and push through policies and plans that they would otherwise not have the support for. Because if you can put it under climate change and global warming and net zero, then people are more likely to push it through. I mean, look at Sadiq Khan and the what essentially is punishing poor people for not having new enough cars. That's what his whole ULEZ scheme is in essence. But, you know, whether it's the Labour Party or Humza Yousaf in Scotland, what we're seeing is those who utilised and exploited net zero and climate change to achieve their policy ends are now being told to pay the piper and being asked, well, where's the progress? Well,
because it's an imaginary, dreamed up sort of target anyway, right? And they've also worked out that it hasn't worked. Because, to be honest, if we had, as we have done, as we're told, we've reduced our global emissions by 50% in this country. Why hasn't it stopped all of the problems? And apparently it hasn't. It's almost as though the climate is not affected by
the climate is obviously the climate problem is obviously huge, and it is, and it isn't left and it isn't right. I mean, you only need to look at Dubai this week and to see that.
Do you know why that happens in Dubai?
But there is.
Do you know what they do in Dubai? Do you know what they do? They seed the clouds to get more rain, and they have no drainage.
Exactly. So you have to play with the weather.
What you can do is go back to 1960 and see what the weather used to be like in Dubai then. Oh, no, you can't, because there was no Dubai.
So you're saying it was chemtrails?
The issue with...
No, it's not chemtrails, but they seed the clouds because they want more water.
It was banned.
My daughter lives there. I know how Dubai works.
Exactly.
They have no drainage whatsoever. And they've had several incidents like this. This is like the worst one. But over the past sort of several months, they've had terrible problems with drainage because they haven't built any.
Talking about Dubai, talking about the Middle East and China and Russia, you know, the biggest issue with net zero and climate change policies that I have and many others have is that you can demonize ordinary people. You can push these oppressive policies onto us in the West, in America, in the UK, in France, and Germany. But the issue is that no matter how much we reduce our carbon emissions and our net zero, our carbon footprint, as long as China, the Middle East, and Russia are continuing to create 70, 80, 90, 100% times larger emissions than we've ever put out.
China's argument is that they are 30 years in the past. So China's argument is they still have like decades to do
absolute coppers, aren't they?
Of course,
China is selling everything that they make to the rest of the world, right? We have got idiots in this country who think that we've somehow passed on our climate emissions to them just because they're killing our manufacturing.
Colonialism.
It's like exactly right. And I mean, they are far advanced of anything that we do in their economy. So the idea that they should have special dispensation to have more coal-fired power stations,
you're absolutely
rubbish.
But saying that they're not doing it, so we don't have to do it, isn't.
Nobody has to do it.
But climate change is.
This is the independent Republic of Mike Graham. What he says goes.
But it is a real thing.
It is
a real thing, and it will affect. And we all do agree, surely, that climate change is a real thing, and that the human beings our place on this planet is destructive.
And the independent Republic of Mike Graham.
That's true. I don't think you can prove that at all. There's no evidence whatsoever that our place on this planet is destructive.
Well, you only need to look at the graphs since the Industrial Revolution.
The graphs are all models, right? The graphs are all models. They were not measuring these things for more than about 200 years. Yes, they can go back and go into the ground and stick, poles into volcanoes to see what used to happen. But at the end of the day, we have been alive on this planet for a tiny, minuscule amount of the time that the planet's been alive.
Exactly.
The idea that we're so arrogant that we think we can kill it all off just because we're driving around in diesel cars is nonsensical.
I think
utterly nonsensical.
I think that the issue that many people again have isn't, the majority of people who don't believe in the climate change and net zero targets aren't climate deniers. They aren't, they aren't right-wing extremists. They are ordinary people who want to put food on their table, keep a roof over their heads, send their kids to a good school, and go to work 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, and live a decent life. And for politicians in their ivory towers to be essentially penalising and punishing ordinary people for the decisions and the mistakes that they have made is absolutely ridiculous.
I think that's the point with that's the point with
and we're up to COP29 now. We've had 29 of them, and nothing has changed.
Agreed, but I think that's the point with Scotland, reneging, etc., and what they said they were going to do. The cost of living crisis has overtaken everything else. So people see climate change problems as nothing to do.
I don't see it.
And I need to pay for my groceries.
Exactly, and if you ask people about climate change, they'll give you a very nice virtue signalling answer. answer.
Yeah, of
But as
course.
soon as you say, would you mind giving me an extra 10 quid
Yeah.
to pay for it, they don't want
It's
to.
absolutely right, and you work on that. And politicians are in the business of getting re-elected. So it's
Yes,
great
of
to
course,
give somebody
yeah.
else a target and say,
Yeah.
oh, we're going to stop it now, but by 2040, and they would have all long gone. Although I still hope that you'll still be showing that brilliant video
Yeah, we
of
will.
Humza.
Of Humza, yeah. Well, I mean, he may not be in power by that stage, but I mean, certainly what I can tell you is that they've already got plans for the Azerbaijan COP29,
Yes, of
which
course.
is going to be taking place in November, and they've also got plans for COP30.
Yes.
So 29 won't be the end of it.
And
30 is in
let's
Brazil.
be
No,
clear,
it's,
they
it's a
haven't-
fair COP.
Yeah.
You've got to keep going.
They haven't
Get your
scrapped
private
net
planes
zero.
ready.
Yeah,
They
absolutely
haven't
right.
scrapped net zero. They've given themselves more time to be able
Yeah.
to enact even more policies on people that will have far-reaching consequences.
Yeah.
They're just extending their
It's
own
like that
ability
old
to
Henny
use
Youngman
it.
joke, who you'll know, but
Yes.
you guys are probably too young to know. He was a very funny American comedian. He said, you hear about the guy who had a terminal illness, the doctor gave him 6 months to live. He said 6 months later he was still alive, gave him another 6 months so he could pay the bill. And that's, what it is. Let's talk about working from home.
Yes.
Because Dowler's probably in favour of that as well. John Donohoe, who is the head of
Yes,
Nike,
he is.
has complained that actually their whole company's profits have now been damaged.
Of course.
Finally, somebody's admitted it. Because everyone's working from home.
And
First
the-
sales slump in 2 years.
Absolutely, and you're not going to use your trainers. And I'm surprised, actually, the statistics of people wearing trousers. The same sort of thing. When you had your Zoom thing, you didn't need to wear anything underneath working on that sort of
Steady.
basis.
I'm not being funny, but surely if you're working from home, you're pretty much wearing your Nike trainers, and you go out for a run at lunchtime, you're more likely.
But as Andrew
surely.
says, no, you're not going out for a run, and no, you're not stimulating the local
Exactly.
economy. You're just lying there in your pyjamas, doing as little work as possible. And one of the reasons that he's saying that they haven't had as much innovation is not just because people are working from home and not sort of buying more shoes.
Yeah.
It's just the creative process
So you mean
which
staff
goes on.
within Nike are the
Yeah,
problem? Is that what
yes,
you're saying?
because they've been working from home, and so
Yeah.
the fact is they've not been as creative because when you're not mixing in a work environment,
Yeah.
you don't come up with the ideas.
Yeah.
You don't sit in coffee rooms and sit
Yeah.
in meeting rooms and actually come up with stuff that you should be doing.
And I'm surprised he didn't actually blame Sunak because of wearing trainers and things like that.
Well, that was
He
Adidas.
apologised, wasn't it?
Oh,
I
yeah,
know.
but they were Adidas.
Exactly.
Did
It was on
Sunak
that basis.
apologise? Because I was at a friend's house who is a fashion influencer the other day, and
Yes.
she was like, "Oh, my shoes are ruined now.
I don't-
Ruined. I can't wear them."
I can't imagine why so many people suddenly pick on one thing and then they all have to wear it.
I don't
understand that.
That's why.
That's called
It's like
fashion.
No,
like
it's
the
not.
poo-
It's
like
called
the
being
poodle
complete
sketch
sheep.
tonight.
But people are sheep. This is why influencers, and I understand there's a conference going down in Devon in the
No,
next few days.
seriously.
It's true. And they have to do that because you don't want to feel this missing out. It's that
Yeah, but it's
fear of
ridiculous.
It's the
missing
same
out.
as
You're
the
not,
as
you're not
the
really missing
catalogue,
out if you've got
the-
different trainers, surely. to God.
It's the same as the catalogues of the 1960s to hark back to your generation.
Yeah.
Like,
The Grattan
trends have
catalogue.
always been a thing, but with social media and with the rise of TikTok and Instagram and all of these micro influencers who are all trying to push their products onto you and are furthered by an algorithm, we are seeing a trend towards this toxic inclusion mindset. But when it comes to the Nike story, I would say as a young person, as someone who is, many of my friends are starting out as graduates now in the workforce. They're working in the city or they're working in Manchester or wherever. I think that the pandemic and the work from home mentality has been one of the most damaging things for
Absolutely.
young people's work
I've been
ethic
saying it for years.
to have ever come out of 2020. For you look at Canary Wharf, for example, the financial and legal hub of the United Kingdom. Most major law firms and financial firms are having to move out of the city. You have to move out into cheaper, smaller areas because they just cannot get bums on seats.
But also with young people, like you said, like I was with a bunch of influencers recently, and they were younger, but they couldn't.
Were they wearing trainers?
But they couldn't string a sentence together with one on one. They used to do. They're used to interacting with their
but that's
phones,
the
but
problem.
not interacting with a human being. And
Exactly.
That will kill off the human race.
Yeah,
Certainly.
exactly.
And we
You'll end up
need
growing a
good-
third opposable thumb or something so that you can text quicker.
But I love that. So people say in signs and in a restaurant, there was somebody with their little daughter, and they did this, and the daughter turned to the father and said, well, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Because obviously people don't do that anymore.
Right.
It's like
I've
clothes,
got
they
to
don't
tell you
do
one
that.
more story before we go.
Yes.
It sort of tickled me earlier on. This is Joe Biden. He's famous for telling stories that aren't particularly true, right? Because he gets mixed up. But apparently he was down in a place called Scranton, Pennsylvania, visiting a war memorial, and there was a lot of names, from the Second World War. And his uncle, apparently, was a guy who was a Second Lieutenant Ambrose J. Finnegan, who was lost over New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, during the Second World War. He flew single-engine planes. They never found him. They found his plane. And do you know what he said, Joe Biden? This is going to amaze you. I hope it will anyway. He says that he believes that he may have been eaten by cannibals.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not joking. This is the leader of the free world.
I love it.
Right?
But I think
Steak and pygmy, absolutely.
And also, if we compare that
good.
to the things that Trump has said, who says he's Jesus and, you know, when he's Nelson Mandela, I think.
Well, he's
like,
never said that any of his relatives were eaten by cannibals.
But again, this is one thing that I will say about this country: we would not stand for our two main candidates to be in their 80s,
that wouldn't
near
work.
70s.
It's
It wouldn't work
extraordinary,
over here.
isn't it? It is
It's extraordinary. It would never happen in this country.
That's why they get stuck in the Lords.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, they can marinate over
Although,
there. But
you know, I do remember a time, I think you might remember this,
Yes.
Andrew, when did Anne Widdecombe not suggest that one of her relatives had been eaten by cannibals?
Oh, no, absolutely.
Papua New
It's not
Guinea.
you.
She'd
And
eaten
news
them,
cycles
that's
don't work on
why.
that sort of
But
basis.
I do think it's interesting. If this were, you know, where Joe Biden made this comment, we were all having a giggle about it. It's very, very funny, you know, an old man telling a silly story. But on the flip side of it, and this is what you were talking about when it comes to the deep divisions within American society and even British to an extent. If this conversation had been happening about Trump on a left-wing broadcaster,
They'd have said
they
it
would,
was racist,
they would have been branding him
for a
racist. They would have been calling for him to be castrated and hung up on the, you know, the temple of George Washington or Abraham Lincoln's statue.
prosecuted.
Exactly. But
Another one. And his popularity would go through the roof again.
Exactly,
The
but-
more you throw at him,
But it's interesting to see the dichotomy of how left-wing political figures and right-wing political figures are treated within today's society.
Absolutely right. And the same
Yeah,
you could
we're
say
easy-
about
it's
Liz
easier to
Truss.
forgive.
You know, she got treated in a way that I don't think any left-wing politician would have got
And
treated.
Laura.
That's another story.
exactly.
Now, if you haven't already heard, Talk is going digital. Here's how you can watch, listen and get involved from Monday, the 29th of April.
Very good morning to you.
Thanks for joining us.
The home of big opinions.
Oh, don't start me on that.
Straight talking.
There's a sort of feeling they ought to look as if they're doing something.
And no nonsense.
So don't accuse anyone else of stoking culture wars.
Is going digital.
Such as the smoke and mirrors of politics.
Make sure you're ready.
But the government has got to be more flexible.
From the end of April, listen to Talk on radio via DAB or your smart speaker. Or watch live on YouTube on your connected TV.
Apocalyptic beard.
I don't know who that bloke was at the end. You're watching the Independent Republic of Mike Graham. After the break, we'll be taking a trip to the world of woke, to where another Scottish story. Primary schools are appointing children as young as 4 as LGBT champions. See you shortly for one more round. Welcome back. You're watching the Independent Republic of Mike Graham right here on Talk TV. Now, it's time for this.
The world of woke.
Now, when my kids were 4, they were kicking a football about and learning how to spell. Most of them knew how to spell, actually. But what they're doing now was not being appointed as LGBT champions, insisting they were gay and going around asking other kids if they were transgender. But that's exactly what LGBT Youth Scotland wants our children to do, primary school children, to be precise. The charity somehow managed to get hold of nearly £1 million in taxpayers' money last year, almost half of that from the Scottish Government, with the rest from local authorities and the NHS. And it spends that money going around Scotland running some sort of woke competition where schools hoping to obtain gold status are required to transform their schools into what sound like LGBT boot camps. Each school joining the scheme is told it must appoint at least 2 pupils and 2 staff members as LGBT champions. Urged to ask pupils if they are part of the LGBT community. They're told to provide evidence of their LGBT safe spaces, such as gender-neutral lavatories and PE classes, to ensure their school uniform is inclusive, and even to put up the organisation's posters and rewrite school policies, undertaking at least one activity which specifically addresses the needs of transgender young people, such as conducting a campaign that addresses trans rights, is also required to win that all-important gold award. Oh, and the cherry on top, LGBT Youth Scotland is charging these schools up to £2 grand for the privilege of being told what to do. It's a world beyond woke. It's completely insane. At this age, children's curious brains are ripe for education, but they're also vulnerable to manipulation. We drop our kids off at school knowing the teachers have a duty of care, but this organisation wants to force children to trade sexual identities like playing cards, declaring and performing them as though something as adult and private as who you want to have sex with is as appropriate for a 4-year-old as whether you prefer jam or chocolate spread. In 1932, readers would have shuddered when Aldous Huxley described children being encouraged to engage in erotic play in his dystopian novel Brave New World. Less than a century later, who'd have thought it could be mistaken for the curriculum at a Scottish primary school? Satire reads more like foreshadowing every day. And that is the world of woke.
The world of woke.
My panel are still here, the two Sams and Andrew, that's what I'm going to call you. It's becoming...
Sam squared.
It's becoming a little bit of a money-making exercise, this LGBT stuff. It's a bit like net zero.
Yeah.
You know,
Look.
let's all make as much money as possible, regardless of how we do it.
Yeah, but you're right, it is crazy. I mean, children at the age of...
Not 4, come on.
Yeah, children at the age of 4, let them just be children.
Yeah.
You don't need to impose... There should be no hidden gender or public ones at that sort of age either.
Exactly.
You need to work on that sort of basis. And what happens... We were talking about this earlier in the break. We talk in the break as well. What I love about it is that there's the great thing to call out the wrongs in this world, call out the genuine sexism, call out the genuine prejudice. When you classify everything as racist and everything as prejudicial, you are devaluing the real claims, and that's the abhorrent thing about it.
I think it's more valuable to teach kids that age just that everybody's the same.
Well, just respect, play.
I think the point is that they're not... You use quite incendiary words, Mike, saying things like force and
Well, that's what they're doing.
And making that no one is or would get a 4-year-old to talk about.
Yeah, but you don't get the gold standard. It's a bit like the whole Stonewall thing. You don't get the mark.
Agreed, but speaking as an LGBT person who...
But are you an LGBT champion?
As an LGBTQ person who grew up in the 80s and 90s, I was made to feel less than. I was made to feel foolish.
4?
I was bullied.
Not at 4.
Yeah, no, but at 4. But my mum says she knew I was gay when I was 3.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Well, she may well have done.
these things. But
you didn't need to know that when you were 3.
but telling children, like if I had been told it was okay that I liked other boys, then that would have saved me. That would have saved me from a lot of grief
You
that
probably
came
didn't know,
first
because
on.
at 4 you're not sexually active. That's
No, I know.
From the opposite end of the spectrum, I'm barely out of diapers, as many presenters like to remind me.
Neither's Andrew.
I'm barely in
about to get back in them.
He's still in his he's in his man diaper right now. I thought I could smell something, Andrew.
But I went to an all-girls grammar school in leafy Shropshire. About as nice and blue and Tory as it can get. By all accounts and standards, you would think that would be a hub of discrimination and forced bullying and whatever else. In all girls school, everyone would want to prove that they're not a lesbian, because that's the stereotype. And yet, I was raised in and went to this school for 7 years, and it was such an open and expressive and welcoming environment, largely in part due to the lack of these forced ideals and forced schemes.
Don't use that
we do have a lot of we have a large LGBT community in my former school. Many girls were bisexual or gay.
A lot of girls'
we had
schools are like that.
we had
But those are
transgender
secondary
people,
schools
and
as well.
they were perfectly welcomed. But we didn't need inclusivity schemes and diversity.
And that's the problem.
In order to make people inclusive.
I absolutely don't think you do need them. I
But
think
the problem
it should be.
Sam,
It should be.
No,
it
but the
should be
problem I've got,
amongst
you know as well as
everything
I
else.
do, that all of this stuff gets weaponised by local councils
Yeah,
because
of
they
course.
get money, and that was my point. Is it becomes about the money in
Precisely.
the end. Let's talk about something else about the money. White van man apparently is losing 14,000
14
quid
grand
a
average
year.
income.
Well,
Average income's
some people might be surprised at how much they were making. 82,000.
Yeah, amazing.
Some of them were making. Builders, I'm not surprised by this, having had a few builders in from time to time. 115,000 quid a year they were making. They've lost 1%. The biggest drop is dry liners, down 12%.
Dry liner, I know, terrible.
What's a dry liner?
Back to those uncomfortable underwear again.
More like a wet liner, really.
I thank you. But electricians, isn't that shocking? I mean, same sort of thing, working on the basis. The reality is that 14 grand it's down. They haven't really classified how they've done it, whether they're sole traders or everything else.
Well, their
about the profit.
takings, they're saying, are down.
Yes.
Which can only mean that people are spending less money because they haven't got as much money. As I know that certainly, Joe, I've said this earlier, during COVID, an awful lot of people had extensions put onto their houses because they had a bit of spare money because they weren't travelling anywhere. Now I suspect it's the opposite.
Well, building can be seen.
Money.
Yeah, exactly. Building can be seen as a luxury. Like if you have a problem with your electrics or a problem with your plumbing, then you need somebody to come and help you. You don't necessarily need to have your kitchen remodeled. You don't, and especially in a cost of living crisis, obviously people were getting furlough up the wazoo during the pandemic. So they were like,
economy.
let's just spend on a new kitchen. Now it's not the same.
In times of economic hardship, you know, the famous saying, make do and mend, that's what we as a British society do. You know, over the pandemic, we saw the rise of DIY culture, and it wouldn't surprise me if a great deal of people now are turning to YouTube my pipes are leaking, so let's figure out a way to fix it myself rather than calling in the local...
Or pull their own teeth out. Don't they do that now?
They do, because you can't get dentists. Shocking picture for me on page 19 of The Sun. This is High Street shootout. Now, this is actually a case that was in court, I think, today at the Old Bailey. A man was convicted of possession of a firearm, but you can clearly see a guy in a sort of, you know, firing position up in Tottenham in North London, firing towards a VW Golf, which is circled in the picture, which you can see driving off. Apparently, the person in the VW Golf tried to shoot back, but the gun stuck. I mean, it's like something seen out of, you know, like New York crime drama.
You never expected on the streets of London, would you? Not from the streets of London. And it is a shocking picture on that sort of basis. As you say, it's from a little while ago, but it's coming to court and that sort of stuff. That's
look, I have a friend who works in the. She's a detective in. I won't say where it is, but she said that. It's the knives and the... She said she's been to scenarios where they've got samurai swords and they cut through bodies like knives and like butter. And she said it's absolutely appalling. So, I mean, we are lucky that we don't have such a gun culture over here.
Yeah.
However, when someone does get a gun...
But the trouble is the gangs have all got guns.
Yes, exactly that's the difference. And you can't bash them over the head with a truncheon when they're holding a Glock in your face.
And this is, I think that this story encapsulates the issue in London, the London bubble of the rise in violent crime as a whole, and the inability of the Metropolitan Police to either stop and search or you know, identify criminal gangs in time before things like this happen. We're seeing across the country violent crime increasing year on year on year, and the police, they've got, you know, in the Metropolitan Police, they've got the funding, they've got the resources, and yet they're choosing to spend it on, you know, on ridiculous vanity projects rather than keeping knives, guns,
more
etc.
diversity nonsense, I'm afraid, isn't it? We've got a little bit of breaking news just to finish up on the show. Live from New York City, they've apparently sworn in the entire jury.
Good heavens!
Wow. I mean, incredibly, they've actually managed to find... I was told it was going to take 2 weeks.
Yes.
But they found... I don't believe this, but they claim they found people who don't have a view of Donald Trump.
I don't believe that at all.
I mean, I can't believe a word of that.
News.
But I guess we'll be bringing you more of that as it happens, of course, throughout the course of what could be one of the most exciting trials ever of the US president being charged with crimes. Incredible stuff. Anyway, that's all from me. Thank you to all of you, the two Sams and Andrew. You've been watching The Independent Republic of Mike Graham. I'll be back, of course, with Plank of the Week tomorrow night at 7 p.m. It's only on Talk TV. See you then.